let me tell you a little bit about myself. So my name is Marco Garganta. I developed this course. I think it's been like 3 years now, so it's been a while. It was, yeah, it's been a couple of years since we started doing Android Bootcamp. It's gone through many different iterations, so it's been changing quite a bit. But before I did Android, I did Java. My background is in, I started doing Java back before it was named Java, sort of like mid-90s. It was a project at Sun in those days. It was called Oak. It was just a tiny little project. And what at least it sort of got me interested in it initially was that Java was going to be this language to program various machinery, right? So we were going to program your stereo, your TV, your microwave, refrigerator, all these things were going to run Java. That was the promise, right? But as we know, that never happened. Java kind of went into the server land, and that's where it took off. And most of the next couple of years, we've been mostly working on enterprise systems. So most of my background has been enterprise Java for the past decade or something, until Android came out, and I kind of saw what I was looking for in Java originally in Android. So that's kind of what got me interested in. I started doing some poking around, experimenting with it, or did an Android Bootcamp course, started teaching that. Just to kind of give you an idea, last year I did over 175 days of actual teaching. So that's basically every other day almost. Did about 200,000 miles and went to like 11 countries, 36 cities, some crazy numbers. I was probably the most Qualcomm offices than anyone, 12 or something worldwide. So been all over the place. So out of that, I actually wrote a book called Learning Android, which is not the best-selling Android book, but it's doing all right. It's been translated into Chinese and German, and it just came out this year in March, I think, and now it's in a third print. Yeah.
Do you have copies of that to sell, or do you know anybody in the neighborhood who's
Yeah, no, you guys are gonna all get the copy. We'll give you a soft copy. If anybody wants a hard copy, I believe we have a bunch too. So you will get that book, so as part of the course. So just so you know, and but that book basically emerged as the from the class. So it's basically a distilled version of the boot camp in a book. So that's what it is. So that's what we're going to be using for the class, and I'll compare where we're at in terms of how we go through the, so you know where it's in relationship to the book. So that's Learning Android. I frequently speak at conferences. OSCON is the open source conference. I've been there 3 times. ACM, IEEE. SDC is both Scandinavian Developer Conference as well as the Sprint Developer Conference. I spoke twice. And DEF CON. I'm a co-chair of a new conference, Android Open. Have you guys heard of it? Yes, like one of the speakers. So we're going to have it again this year. In March, April, spring. So I'll let you guys know. But we're working on it. We're planning it. So if you know anybody who is interested in speaking, let me know. That's basically what I do. Look for speakers. So, we also run a local user group called SF Android, which is a really good resource that you should know about. It's basically a San Francisco Android users group, and we have some really cool speakers and talks. Like the most recent talk was from Romain Guy and Shad Haas, who are the guys from Google. Romain wrote the original home screen application on your phone. Haas came from, I believe, Adobe, and they're responsible for RenderScript, among other things. So they do a lot of graphics and such. So, so it's a great group. It's all free. If you're local in San Francisco, come check it out. Join it. If you're not, we try to record everything and make it available. So all the talks eventually make it so you can watch it on YouTube. It's also free. So, so that's a little bit about myself and sort of what I've done in the community. Just really briefly, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about a little bit about the history of Android, kind of just warm up, make sure everyone's on the same page. Talk about the versions, talk about the stack, what really comprises the Android operating system, some of the features. And then really quickly, we're going to jump into Hello World. The point of Hello World is going to be to make sure you guys have the system set up properly. So we're going to just test that everything works. And after that, we're going to dissect it. So we're actually going to look at, okay, so here's an application. What are the moving parts? What are all the bits and pieces that go into an application? So we're going to talk about that. Once we kind of get that out of the way, we're going to talk about the main building blocks. So this is sort of, and I know from your assessments that many of you want to know about how to architect an application, right? Not just go in and write it. So we're going to talk about what are the architectural pieces, what are these building blocks, the lines and circles, that you would use to design something. So we're going to walk through a design of an application, and in this case, it's going to be an application that we're going to be later on actually building, converting. So we're going to start with the back of a napkin, lines and circles, design something, and then eventually make it into a code, and then eventually run it. And we're going to do that iteratively. So each iteration, you're going to have something that works. So that's basically what we're going to talk about. This is roughly just today, so just so you know. So it's going to be, we're going to be moving to different things tomorrow and so on. Oh, by the way, so we likely have some time to cover other things. So not everything has to be 100% scripted. So if you have special interests, things that you would like to know about and so on, just let me know. We're going to jot it down. We'll create a parking lot of other topics, and then, time permitting, we're going to pick up from those things. So feel free to kind of ask for things that, maybe your special interests, right, with respect to Android. Because Android is becoming such a big platform that, different people have different sort of angles that they're looking at it from. So that's a little bit about the agenda. So just to kind of give you a little rundown through the history of Android. So basically, and again, the goal of the history is really to kind of give you an idea of what the future may hold, so you can kind of try to predict the future at least. And you will get the slides later on when we set up the sharing, so just so you know. So basically in 2005, there was a tiny little company in Palo Alto called Android Inc. Google bought it, right? In those days, it was kind of, it wasn't typical for Google to go out and buy companies. It's not like this year they bought one company every week. They bought 57 companies this year. But back in 2005, that wasn't the case. So this was kind of off, right? Why is Google buying this company? But everything kind of went quiet. So for a couple of years, we really didn't know anything about this. They just bought this company and started doing some work. And then in 2007, Google came out and said that they're going to create this alliance, the Open Handset Alliance, that is going to own this project called Android, right? So technically, Android is not owned by Google; it's owned by OAJ. But in practice, Google is the biggest muscle behind that whole project. And Open Handset Alliance is basically an alliance of mobile carriers such as T-Mobile, Sprint, China Mobile, etc., etc. You have chip manufacturers like Qualcomm is part of the alliance. You have software companies like Google and so on and so on. So it's about, I think, around 85 members now or so that are part of the alliance. And also OEMs, right? HTC, Samsung, etc. So between 2008 and 10, we basically saw a whole slew of new releases come out. We basically saw Android take over the world in terms of the, at least the market share. This year, what we're seeing is that sort of the battlefield has shifted from the smartphones more to the other devices. So tablets are becoming mostly the next mainstream sort of battlefield. But what we are seeing emerge as well are TVs and also things that are not traditional computing devices like home automation. Think about everything from your thermostat to your refrigerator to your alarm system to your car navigation. Those are all the things that are sort of primed for disruption, and that's where Android is sort of, perfectly positioned to sort of, play a big role. Those are some fun things that are happening. So back in 2005, when Google bought this company, everyone sort of thought Google's going to come out with a phone. There were rumors about the G phone. That was what people were referring to. And Eric Schmidt came out and he basically said, look, our goal is not to have a single device. We're not our ambition is not another gizmo, right? What we want to do is we want to create a platform that's going to run on many different platforms, many different platforms. So we're going to have a software platform that runs on different hardware, right? So that was their vision for Android, and it looks like just a random statement, but actually we find that it trickles down into many different business decisions that were made subsequently. So that's what's interesting about this statement. I'll point it out later on as we keep on going. So speaking of versions, so these are some of the versions that we have with respect to Android. Most of you probably know this, but this is your standard sort of version that we have for any piece of software. That doesn't really matter, doesn't really tell us anything. You can, for the most part, ignore that. Nickname is somewhat more interesting. It tells us about the family of releases. Initially, the nicknames were going to be named after robots, so it was A for Android, but then they kind of ran out of names, and they switched to desserts. So, yeah, what would be a B? Some people say Bishop, maybe from, is it Star Trek, Star Wars? Yeah. Anyway. So anyway, but they kind of switched the naming scheme after Android. So right now, as you guys know, we're at Ice Cream Sandwich, and the possible next name is going to be Jelly Bean. So that's what people say. In terms of the API level, this is basically the capabilities of the platform at a specific release. So this number is going to matter to us the most. That's how we're going to be referring to a release. That's probably the most precise, right? So right now we're at 14. The number just simply increments 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, right? So that spells out the capabilities of the framework. So things that you can expect at a certain level. Does anybody have any restraints in terms of or constraints in terms of API levels? Do you guys know that?
Like, how far back do you have to go? Do you think about how you're targeting your ads?
How far back you have to go?
Yeah.
So that's a good question. So let's take a look at the distribution of the releases. So that's a business decision, right? So here is what we currently have on the market. Now, this data is somewhat old on purpose. It's about a month old. I believe this is November 1st. And so this is the historical distribution of releases. Now, I wanted to kind of point out where you can get the latest data. So the website that's your friend is going to be developer.android.com. That's probably, the most important Android website that you want to know about. I'm sure most of you already have heard of it. So under target devices, you actually get the current information. So as you can see, we just crossed the 50% mark for 233 for gingerbread. So gingerbread is now over 50% of the market share out there. There's quite a few people still running Froyo, and then we have a little bit of Eclair, and then we still have some of the 1Xs out there. People who are stuck with 2-year contracts, 3-year contracts, still using old phones. And we don't have a lot of honeycombs. There just hasn't been a lot of adoption yet. So that's basically what the market looks like. This is sort of interesting in terms of how quickly a new release gets adopted. In a perfect world, we do have the over-the-air set of updates. So basically, new release of Android comes out, like Ice Cream Sandwich, for example. It should be that my carrier just pushes the file down to my phone, and bam, overnight, I update to the latest, greatest, right? So how many of you have Ice Cream Sandwich running? Nobody, right? And that's because it takes a long time to actually propagate those changes. There are a couple of good articles I'll share with you later on why that is, but basically it has to do with certifications. So each device actually has to go through various levels of certifications and so forth. It's a quite expensive in time. It takes a long time, that whole process. So that's why we don't get the latest releases anytime soon. Right. So back to how far do you have to go? It really depends on what the business case is, who you want to support, and so forth. It's kind of like if you guys are coming from the web realm, right? how far do you have to go in web support? Right? Do you have to support, you know, IE9 or IE6, right? That's a big, costly decision to make.
So maybe just a quick one-liner between Eclair and Froyo. Is there significant architectural differences that could break your app if you don't go towards Eclair? You start from Froyo?
Yeah, so the question is about the differences, for example, between Froyo and Eclair. Each release brings something new to the mix, right? Everything is backwards compatible. So your old app should run on a new device, but your new app may or may not work well on the old device. So we'll talk about the best practice later on, but in a nutshell, what you usually want to do is you want to target the latest greatest, but you want to figure out how far back you're going to support the old devices. So you may say, all right, I want to target ice cream sandwich because that gives me the most capabilities and so forth. I'm running against the latest code, but 50% of people still run gingerbread, and another 25% or 20% Froyo. I may actually draw a line here, and so basically in that case, I may say this is the universe of things that we want to support. Okay, so now you gotta write the app to gracefully scale itself down to on the older phones to the capabilities of that phone. All right. So for example, I use an example of do you guys know what a near field communication is? NFC. It's basically a way to just take your phone and you can just tap on something and they can pair up. It's kind of like a wireless communication, but with very low friction, because the distance, the physical distance is limited. It's theoretically impossible to go beyond a couple of centimeters, right? So that's NFC. So as such, it's great for payments, right? So for example, if I want to go to Starbucks, I want to pay for my coffee, I could just do this, just tap on a counter and it's done. I don't have to pair with anything. I don't have to scan anything. I don't have to type anything. I just basically tap and my payment is processed, right? So it's a very low friction protocol, right? So imagine that, for example, I am developing a wallet application, right? Micropayments application or something like that. So you would want to certainly target that feature, right? Because it's such a great feature. It's designed exactly for that. The problem is that only one phone currently has it, right? It's the Nexus Galaxy, the Nexus S, right? No other phone have it, but there's about 16 phones in the pipeline that they're going to have it any day soon, right? So you're kind of like, okay, I want to have this capability today, but reality is that very large chunk of the market doesn't have that capability. So your app should gracefully scale itself down on those devices to disable that capability. Maybe if I'm running it on an older phone that doesn't have the chip, NFC chip, I would still be able to pay for my Starbucks, but I would pay via like QR code or some other mechanism like that, right? So, but you as a developer have to worry about this and scale down maybe gray out that button or take away that feature. So we'll talk about that as we actually get to the code. But those are some business decisions to be made. So now, in addition to official stuff, so in addition to stuff that comes out of Google, or more precisely Open Handset Alliance, or even more precisely Android Open Source Project, AOSP, you have other entities basically customizing Android, so making customizations to the Android. And some of the more popular ones are HTC with its Sense UI, Samsung with TouchWiz, and Motorola has something called MotoBlur. HTC Sense is probably the most sophisticated modification. Sometimes people refer to these modifications as skins or overlays, but they're usually much deeper than that. So HTC Sense team up in Taiwan, it's thousands of engineers. So these guys it's almost as big of a team as Android's original team, right? So they actually substantially modify the platform, all the layers of the platform, not just sort of like, oh, we made some graphics look prettier. So they do quite a bit of work, for instance, right? Motorola is now focusing more on the enterprise sort of stuff. So they've been doing lots of sort of making the devices be enterprise grade. and Samsung is, in terms of software, is not as sophisticated as the other players, right? So we'll talk about add-ons later on. Now, there's obviously with Google. So Google has its own sort of add-on, and that's basically all the Google goodies like Google Maps, Google Gtalk, Gmail, etc. So most of the consumer phones out there are with Google modified, right? So you kind of have this like multi-dimensional sort of way to modify the platform. With Google, stuff is basically proprietary, so that requires licensing. And the terms of those licensing deals are usually not published publicly, so we don't really know what it entails. But it's something that your carrier or OEM would sign to basically get, Google Maps.